Okay, ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. We're about to begin. A couple of housekeeping issues. The fire escape is through there. Please mute your phones. There is guest Wi-Fi. It's NPC Wi-Fi 1908, the year of the Press Club's establishment. And here we go. So anyway, thank you for coming today. My name is David Ellis. I'm the Director of Communications and Policy Strategy at the Energy Futures Initiative, or as we sort of call it, EFI. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. in the John Peter Zenger Room, either here in person or via live stream, and we know that state energy offices around the country are joining us that way. We are here to formally launch the 2019 U.S. Energy and Employment Report, or USEER, as we call it. As many of you know, the jobs report was launched by the Department of Energy 4 years ago under the leadership of then Secretary Ernest J. Moniz, who joins us this morning. In 2018, the Secretary's Energy Futures Initiative and the National Association of State Energy Officials, NASIO, which are both not-for-profit entities, took over the report when DOE declined to issue new annual versions. By doing this, we ensured that both public and private sectors continue to have access to critical data, providing a unique snapshot of our energy employment ecosystem. By supporting the USEER, we provide in-depth year-by-year data and help create forward-looking analysis on a range of energy employment issues. Now, the data sets associated with this initiative are massive and deep, and much more can be done beyond what we'll be talking about today, and we'll be talking about future projects as well. Today, the entirety of the report, with the supplement outlining energy employment trends in all 50 states and DC, is available for download at www.usenergyjobs.org, along with an interactive map showing state energy employment by category. The report has been updated and expanded, and the other speakers will tell you how. So there's a lot to dive into, including a panel at the second half of our presentation on the challenges of energy employment. So let me introduce our first speaker and partner in this great project, David Terry, the Executive Director of NASIO.
Good morning. Thank you, David. I want to thank everybody for coming today, and especially for the partnership with the Energy Futures Initiative and BW Research Partnerships. NASIO, the state energy officials around the country, have benefited greatly from this, and we're really pleased to offer and be a part of this launch of the fourth installment of the report. As David mentioned, the data that included in the USEER, or the U.S. Energy Employment Report, includes 5 major sectors you'll hear more about: fuels, electric power generation, transmission, distribution, and storage, energy efficiency, and motor vehicles. And for the first time, the report's going to include an analysis of wages that we also think is particularly important, and many other components you'll hear from some of our panelists later. There are many people to thank as a part of today's announcement and the work that's occurred among our staff and supporters. I particularly want to call out Dave Foster of EFI, Phil Jordan of BW Research Partners, and Sandy Fazeli of NASIO for their leadership in getting the project done. Similarly, our foundation and private sector supporters, many of whom you see up on the screen, I would like to take a moment just to read through them. It's important to note how they've stepped forward and the diversity of the funders: JPB Foundation, Nathan Cummings Foundation, William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, E for the Future, McKnight Foundation, Energy Foundation, Advanced Energy Economy, the Clean Energy Trust, the Energy Storage Association, Environmental Entrepreneurs, the Nuclear Energy Institute, and the Solar Foundation. Another part of the sponsorship and supporters we're particularly proud of are how many states have stepped up. The states use this data, literally all of the states, to inform their workforce development, their education programs. And this year we had, more states than ever step forward to help support with financial resources and input and ideas. I'll just list them off quickly: California, Florida, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, Rhode Island, Tennessee, Wisconsin, and Vermont. I also want to highlight in this year's report, we have an introduction from two governors, Governor Herbert of Utah and Governor Lamont of Connecticut. There's a fantastic bipartisan message in this report about the importance of energy and workforce development to our economy and to everyday Americans' lives, and I really commend you to take a look at that. I also wanted to note that we have Dr. Laura Nelson here this morning on behalf of Governor Herbert. She'll be talking in a panel later. She is Governor Herbert's energy advisor and the director of the Energy Office, as well as NASIO's vice chair, so we're pleased to have her here a little later. I think the interesting part of the report, many of us are maybe energy geeks, or we think of ourselves maybe that way about the data, and it's interesting, but it's a lot more than interesting. The energy offices around the country, and certainly private sector companies, are using this data every day to inform the investments they make. Investments in K through 12 education and energy, universities, community colleges. Literally at our energy policy conference that we had a few weeks ago here in Washington, we heard from Florida, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, New York, all talking about how they're using jobs data, workforce data to help inform what they do. I think a piece of this that we find particularly important, and it's obviously on many people's radar screens now, and that's the importance of workforce development to be inclusive, of a diverse workforce, and also equity issues. So much so, we contributed a particularly important part to the report in that regard, and also have stood up a NASIO Equity in Energy Programs Task Force. The task force met just a few weeks ago, and it's to help the states inform how their energy policies and programs address equity issues. Workforce is central to that. Much of the partnership that we have with the EFI over the last couple of years has been through this employment report. However, EFI's work and NASIO's work obviously spans many areas. We have partnerships with many organizations, and I can tell you that in the EFI case, it's really been extraordinary. The team that we have put together, I think, is part of why we've delivered such a successful project, and the input we've gotten from our supporters and from the states has helped greatly. A lot of that has to do with the longstanding leadership of our next presenter. I want to move on and turn it over to, but former Secretary of Energy Moniz's commitment to state partnerships and state activities and energy is well known and greatly appreciated among those in the NASIO community. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the CEO of the Energy Futures Initiative, Ernest Moniz. Ernie?
Well, thank you, David. You said it several times. I'll repeat it. Great partnership, and I think as David Ellis, and we have a lot of Davids here, by the way. As David Ellis said earlier, as you know, this energy jobs report really did start 4 years ago, and I will another David Foster was right at the heart of getting that moved out at the Department of Energy. But the idea that this was something that really needed kind of continuity and yet building out over time with new features, as David. David, I can just say David and always be right. Mentioned was so important. I do want to acknowledge also with EFI. We're now about a year and a half old. Joe Heiser sitting here, and Melanie Kenderdine, who is on her way to Hawaii, were my co-conspirators in establishing EFI, and we try to bring good, hard analysis to energy problems, and that analysis, some of that analysis will be based on things like the enormous database that we are able to generate through this jobs report. I just want to say in terms of well, okay, I'll add one other thing. There's certainly we obviously do present these results to federal policymakers. Last year, when we released the report, we were pleased to be sponsored in that on the Hill by Senators Murkowski and Cantwell, once again emphasizing our bipartisan approach to this. But this year, the focus that we've always had on states has been particularly sharpened by having Governors Herbert and Lamont write the forward. And I will repeat also and welcome Laura Nelson here. I'm happy to say that. So last May, for example, with her persistence, I did go to Utah and take part in Governor Herbert's energy policy meeting, and we appreciate again her support and her being here today. Just in a broad sense, I'd like to say that, today we hear a lot of discussion. I suspect we will hear more discussion over the next while about a Green New Deal. And I do want to emphasize I used the word "a," not "the," at this time, because what this discussion is about, and it's brought to the fore a discussion that we really need to think about going to a low carbon future. I mean, it's happening. If just look around, I mean, and it is happening, and there will be more drive in this direction. But that, I think what's really been added into the mix is bringing into the foreground the idea that in looking at that, we need to also look at the question of who are we bringing along and who are we not bringing along in this transformation that will be happening over years and decades. And that's where I think, again, this report, it's not a policy report, but it provides really critical, fine-grained data that can be used in looking at these issues. So that's the context in which we see this, and in particular as well. And David, one of the Davids referred to it is that we also have this broken down in multiple dimensions, but including the state by state breakdowns, which can be used, we hope, quite effectively. So this is, I think this report again will be a central piece of data upon which policymakers at the federal, but very importantly at the state and the regional level can look at. As was mentioned, going back to our time at DOE, we strongly emphasized the importance of looking at states and regions, and I'll just mention in the context again of this dialogue that's going forward in terms of carbon and in terms of communities and jobs, that's been a real focus of ours for years. It will continue to be a focus. And the underlying reason is that when we look at these transformations, whether it's in the workforce or in the approach to low carbon, we're going to have different answers in different states and different regions for very good reasons. The assets, the innovation assets, to the renewable assets, to other energy assets, energy infrastructure issues. So that's its core to the path forward. And again, I think our report hopefully will be an important part of underpinning those considerations. Let me just add two last points. One is that a few weeks ago, and again, David Foster is central to our activities here at EFI. We met also with a number of the labor unions. Another constituency I would mention that is very much looking to be part of a low carbon transition, but one that is, of course, naturally very, very focused on energy infrastructure. Energy infrastructure does relate very closely to jobs, as we all know, and so it gets another constituency that is important. By the way, I forgot I should have mentioned Phil Jordan and BW Research. I guess David Foster will probably say more about another long-standing partnership that we have had in doing this. Finally, I'll just add another little advertisement, and that is that again, the report is really the foundation for then subsequent analysis, hopefully policy making and the like. So another feature that we're going to add this year now following this rollout will be we're going to have a student competition for papers that come forward and present analyses around issues that utilize the data in the report. So I think hopefully every year we're going to be finding new ways of amplifying the impact of what we have here. So with that, I am now going to turn it over to David Foster, who will go through 143 slides in the next 20 minutes. Thank you.
Well, I knew you were all thrilled to come to an early morning event, standing room only, to talk about labor force data. But even I won't subject you to 150 slides. Okay. I'm
The opposite of there.
got it.
There you go.
Got it? So I'm going to give you an overview of what happened in 2018 in our 2019 report. But first, I want to make sure I'm not going to give you the lengthy discussion of methodology that we provided you with last year, because we think you are largely convinced that this is a good methodology that provides a good look at the energy snapshot. But nonetheless, just to remind you what this is, it studies employment in the following sectors, as David Terry said. We also define a portion of that, fuels, electric power generation, and transmission, distribution, and storage, as what you might call the traditional energy sector. But don't forget that we include technologies, renewable technologies like solar and wind, as part of the traditional energy sector that's producing and distributing fuels and electricity. And the content, we always want to remind people, is based on an employer survey of 53 different technologies that cross the gamut of energy efficiency, and motor vehicles, spread across 186 different NAICS codes in the industrial classification system. That's about 15%. And we go far beyond just trying to count jobs. We go into all these other subjects, which from the design of the study was really one of the main focuses of it, trying to find out about hiring difficulties, hiring expectations, high demand jobs and skills gaps, trying to understand the demographics of these different energy sectors as the technologies changed, particularly so that we could address equity issues. And finally, looked at it from both a national level, but down to the actual MSA level and legislative districts for people for whom that's interesting. So let's jump into some of the key takeaways. In 2018, and I apologize for the text being a little small, we added 152,000 new jobs in energy efficiency and the traditional energy sectors. That's the fourth year in a row in which these sectors have outgrown the American economy as a whole. And it's been at a, 2.3% increase in jobs compared to the economy as a whole at 1.8%, so half a percentage point faster. And this has, I think, been one of the most important findings we've found every year, that during a period of this kind of technological change and disruption, that we're really driving the economy. And of course, energy efficiency of these sectors was by far the biggest job producer, once again adding 76,000 new jobs, 275,000 new jobs in the last 3 years alone. So think of that as a really significant contribution to what's going on in the country. In the fuel sector, we saw a real rebound and a change from fuels having declined in 2 years prior, then having held steady, and then this year a leap up of 52,000 new jobs, largely concentrated in oil and natural gas. You will see a slight uptick actually in coal mining jobs. However, on the consumption side, coal generation jobs declined by a very significant 7,000 jobs in 2018. Solar jobs also declined for the second year in a row. Solar lost about 8,000 jobs that were majority-time jobs in the economy, as reported also by the Solar Foundation, which incidentally uses the same data set that we do. It's a collaborative effort. On the other side, though, we saw gas, wind, combined heat and power, and geothermal on the low emissions side all increased in jobs during the same period of time. Energy storage was another significant success story. There are now 81,000 jobs in energy storage across all technologies. 61,000 of those are in battery storage, which grew, I think, by 18% in the last year. Motor vehicles was likewise another banner year in job creation. Interesting and of note to us because we've been at peak auto sales in the United States for 2 or 3 years, and sales have actually declined, I think, by some 800,000 units over the last 2 years, but jobs expanded by 74,000. And a particular interest to us was the rebound in jobs in the alternative fuel vehicles step, which those of you might remember declined by over 40,000 jobs in 2017, rebounded this year, adding 34,000 jobs. So that was a significant step forward. Finally, of key takeaways, a couple things that I think we very strongly wanted to emphasize in this report, and certainly the panel coming after this presentation will underscore that as well, is the way hiring difficulty across all these sectors really skyrocketed in 2018, jumping by 10%, going from 70% difficulty on average to 77%. And among one particular area, one of the fastest growing sectors in the construction side of energy efficiency, now a majority of employers say it is very difficult to find new employees. So really a barrier to the kind of economic growth that these employers are otherwise predicting, and something that offers both challenge and opportunity if we can figure it out. And finally, growth expectations on average across all these areas is, I think, if I'm straining my eyes to see that, at about 4.8% overall for next year. So still an expectation of solid growth in the years to come. On the right-hand side, something that we added to the report is an effort to show the public how these data sets are being used. And so we try to shine a spotlight on a variety of different users and contributors. This one in particular comes from Alicia Barton, the CEO of the New York State Energy Resource and Development Authority. And she says we're in the middle of a historic transition of the energy sector, and she goes on to talk about how this data is really critical in how they spend and target their workforce development. This particular case, they're putting $70 million over a 5-year period into workforce training around energy efficiency issues. The next slide, you can see year-over-year growth in the 5 sectors we look at. The 4 left ones are the traditional energy sector. The one on the far right is motor vehicles. You'll see a little bit of the up and down cycle on the left among fuels, likewise among electric power generation. 226,000 new jobs if you add up all 5 sectors. I'm not going to go into all of these in great detail, but you can see the actual size of each of these sectors and some of the more recent increases and declines in each one of them. The one I would point out is how electric power generation in total, employment dropped by over 8,000 jobs total, down to 875. Inside that, a lot more going on than just coal and solar. So you can see there were gains in some technologies while there were losses in others. A few of the other changes that we added to this year's report, mention has already been made of the important governor's introduction to the report. I mentioned the spotlights on real-world experience. So in each one of the chapters, we tried to highlight a specific opportunity or activity that was going on that people and employers found of particular importance. We did get 5 new states that joined into the production of the report. And for 4 of those, we will be producing special energy job state reports for the energy offices in those states. 2 new trade associations we welcomed into this production, the Energy Storage Association and the Nuclear Energy Institute. And then we created a number of new chart and data formats that provide crosscuts on both technology and industrial sector profiles for virtually every one of the technologies that we look at, and we'll show you a couple of examples of that. And finally, we created these things we did call crosscuts because we thought we were giving an incomplete picture of specific industries that cut across many of the chapters in our analysis. So we created these. We always had one for electric power generation and fuels so that people could get an adequate sense of job comparisons when you were looking at those generation technologies that use fuels and those that don't. But we also wanted to look at industries like natural gas and the others listed there that cut across everything from fuel production to electric generation to transmission, distribution, and storage so that you got a clear view of what actually was going on across the entire value chain of those industries. So we'll take a quick look at each of the 5 chapters and some of the key trends that were going on. I'm not going to go through all of these, but we tried to create an easily accessible format in which you could get key statistics that were important and also look at trends around job growth and other key indicators. So this one on fuels, you can see 4.9% growth last year, 3% growth expected next year. And then you can see an example on the left of the kind of technology industry breakdowns, numbers of employees, those that grew and those that declined in a particular year, which should be very helpful in getting a clear picture of exactly where the job growth or change is. Is it happening in a particular fuel? And is it happening in construction or is it happening in professional services? Where are the real growth areas and opportunities? And we do those kinds of breakdowns in the projection of job growth for the coming years. So you can tell, for instance, if you have a construction worker shortage or you have a professional services shortage, for instance. We highlighted here Denise Brindley, who is the recently designated executive director of the Office of Energy in Pennsylvania. And we highlighted Denise because they really, as she put it, are at a critical inflection point in Pennsylvania. And as I was mentioning earlier this morning, Pennsylvania has added, I think, about 6,200 jobs in the last 2 years in natural gas extraction and in electrical power generation from natural gas. At the same time, they've closed down 14 coal-fired power plants, not exactly the same time in the preceding 6 years. So a very dramatic change that's going on, destabilization of the economics of nuclear power, which provides 40% of their electricity. And all at the same time, Denise is tasked with implementing Governor Wolf's climate emission reduction goals of 80% by 2050. And so they have a very complex strategy that's viewed, focused on everything from technology development to how they use their natural gas resource as a broad-based economic development tool across manufacturing and a variety of other technologies. So this is exactly the kind of example that we see the importance of the data that we're producing really resulting in strong and differentiated regional economic development energy strategies. So to move on quickly, electric power, as we mentioned, declined by almost 1% in 2018, but interestingly, across the entire electric power generation field, employers were predicting over 7% growth in 2019. A lot of this we found is in the expectation of increased investments in renewable energy construction. In the electric power generation field, we also highlighted the challenges in meeting cybersecurity training goals. So we interviewed and talked with Jim Samborovich, who runs cybersecurity for Xcel Energy, and he described to us the challenge they've faced in tripling their cybersecurity workforce over the next year and a half. So really a very significant challenge to them, and something that's facing us throughout the utility sector is how do we manage the continued threats. As he said, for a utility, a cyber attack just doesn't hurt us, it turns out the lights for everybody. Then moving on to transmission, distribution, and storage, we saw 2.5% growth in the TDS employment, excluding those retail employees who are in the gas station industry. That was about 33,000 new jobs, and the TDS employers expect that to go up slightly to 3.2%. These, I think, are some of the best jobs in the energy field in terms of pay and benefits, and they also are deeply concentrated in two sectors, about 35% of it in construction and about 31% in the utility industry itself. So again, a key focus of stabilizing growth wherever these jobs are happening. In here, we highlighted the work of Jobs to Move America, headed up by a woman named Madeline Janis, who said that public agencies have the opportunity to create a pathway forward that is embedded with equity and opportunity, and describes how these kinds of investments in infrastructure are really a ready-made tool for those who want to take on the issues of equity in society, and a lot of good work has been done in this area and can be done in the future. Then in energy efficiency, probably the most striking challenge that we have, 3.4% growth last year and 7.8% growth predicted by employers for 2019. And as we've seen this skyrocketing demand for energy efficiency technologies, we've shown less and less capacity to actually fulfill that demand because of lack of a skilled workforce. I mentioned earlier that construction, which makes up a majority of energy efficiency jobs, is the area where we found the hardest difficulty to hire throughout the entire survey. And here we spotlighted Leo Gerard, the president of the United Steelworkers Union, the country's largest, North America's largest manufacturing union, who reminded us, as he said often, we don't need to choose between good jobs and a clean environment. We can and will have both. And he details about how the demand for energy efficiency and retrofits sparks a deep demand for the kinds of materials that his union makes in steel, aluminum, concrete, and for that reason, this is why we ought to invest more in energy efficiency. And finally, the motor vehicles industry, 3% growth last year, still predicting growth in spite of the declining number of sales, 2.2% for next year. We do a deep dive into alternative fuel vehicles so that you can see what that actual value chain is made up of, how much of it is manufacturing, how much of it is motor vehicle repairs and professional services. And we also take a look at fuel efficiency in the auto parts industry. And so we found that 43% of employees, roughly 486,000, are working in the parts supply chain of motor vehicles, contributing directly to fuel economy. And here we highlighted the difficulties in hiring of Kaiser Aluminum, who built a state-of-the-art motor vehicle supply chain plant in Kalamazoo, Michigan, which now has an unemployment rate of 3.4%. And Kaiser tells you a little bit about how they're trying to meet this difficulty when it's virtual full employment, and yet they're trying to attract people into a very important industry for vehicle lightweighting. A very quick summary that we usually try to do of what's going on with low carbon emissions energy in both electricity and fuels. That number of 800,000 has stayed basically flat over the last 3-4 years that we've done this study. But what you have seen is a very significant trend change in terms of the technologies that are growing and the technologies that are declining. And so you've seen probably the most steady growth has come in low emissions natural gas, which jumped by 7% last year, now up over 69,000. A majority of natural gas generation plants are using this high technology or low emissions technology. And in most of the other low emissions generation technologies, except for solar, you've continued to see pretty steady growth. And then, of course, in nuclear, you've seen this flattening out and slight declines as some of the plants have come under pressure. We do like to take a quick look at the construction industry because it's important to note how significant construction is to our overall energy workforce. In energy, generally, almost 1.9 million construction jobs. That's 26% of all construction jobs in the country are focused on energy, and a little higher than that of all energy jobs generally. You see 1.3 million of those are in energy efficiency, another 480,000 in the basic infrastructure, and another 300,000 are in manufacturing. So in the electric power generation and fuels, there are something like 320,000 manufacturing jobs spread across a number of these fields. Construction firms, again, I can't repeat this enough, reporting this very high difficulty in the entire survey. So it is both a challenge and, of course, if we solve it, it's a great opportunity. Just to give you the high view on hiring difficulties, as I mentioned, just under 77% of all surveyed employers reported difficulty hiring qualified workers in the last year. On average, 29% reported it was very difficult. So contrast that to the 52 in energy efficiency construction. Then we have listed just a few of the technologies and occupations with the highest difficulties and some of the highest demand occupations in energy efficiency construction. But there's an awful lot of detail on all of these issues spread across different technologies and geographies in the report. Then the overall hiring, projected hiring rates. I mentioned those as I went through the chapters, so I'm not going to repeat those. But an awful lot of jobs at stake if we're able to produce the kind of training systems to allow this kind of expansion of the workforce to take place. Finally, on workforce demographics, we found that many of these sectors are now racially more diverse than the workforce as a whole, which is at 22%. And you can see the percentage variation around these 5 different sectors. For Latino or Hispanic, from 10 to 19%, Black or African American from 5 to 9%, and then those who identify 2 or more races are from 7 to 10% in these 5 areas compared to 2% in census data overall. Of all of these sectors, electric power generation is the most diverse, with 31% of the workforce people of color. Women are not doing as equitably in these sectors, varying from 23 to 32% compared to a workforce of 47%. Again, electric power generation is the most diverse. These sectors do very well with veterans hiring, ranging from 9 to 11% compared to 6% nationally. And finally, unionization rates are generally higher than the national rate of 6.5% in the private sector, except in fuels, which is at 3%. They range up to 16% in electric power generation and in transmission, distribution, and storage. I want to give you just a very brief look before stepping down on one of the areas that we're getting into more deeply. Energy Jobs Wage Data Project, we call it. Our goal is to create a job quality index for jobs in the energy and energy efficiency sectors as a way of looking at how do we evaluate that aspect of what's going on during this period of rapid technological change. Our problem is that jobs in these different technologies rarely require completely unique skills and often build upon existing skill sets, but may require specialized training and qualifications. So the index components are listed above, of course, wages and benefits and safety, But we also want to look at this issue of career advancement and what are the certification opportunities, premiums, what are the barriers to entry to jobs, and a variety of other factors. Here's just a sneak peek at some of the data that we did publish in this report and some of the crosscuts so that you can start seeing the different average entry-level wages across nuclear, natural gas, petroleum, coal. I guess it shouldn't be a complete surprise to anyone that among the fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, and petroleum, that the average median level wage was highest in the coal industry, and that I think just flags a challenge, is what happens when one technology starts to decline and others start to rise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil Jordan, our valued partner at VW Research, who we worked with for 2 years at DOE producing this report, and now have worked with for 2 years following. Phil.
Thanks very much, Dave. Thank you for your remarks and your leadership in this initiative and your mentorship and your friendship. I also just like to very quickly recognize Jeanette Pablo and David Ellis and Sandy Fazeli, who ran the structure of our weekly meetings, and also Ryan Young, our research manager, who poured his heart and soul and, most importantly, his brain into this project. So thanks, Ryan, for all your work on this. And, of course, to David Terry and Secretary Moniz for your leadership and support in making sure that this important work continues. So thank you for that. I'm going to be quite brief to help with the transition from the data presentation to a panel. And I want to get right to the brilliant insights from our panelists, but I did want to give a few observations in taking a step back and looking at the data so that we can think through some of the implications of what we learned this year. So, you know, as Dave Foster sort of mentioned, oil and gas were sort of the big winners this year, of course, together with energy efficiency. And really, when we look at the transition that's often talked about in the energy economy, we can very clearly see this transition from coal to natural gas in the employment data. But also, just as a important note here, if you look at things sort of in a too aggregated fashion, you miss a lot of nuance, right? So this slide is intended to be somewhat of a caution as we look at the data, because if you just look at things from 10,000 feet, you might miss some nuance and therefore lose some of the important takeaways. So here we see, you know, this decline of all other generation and fuels when you combine all the other technologies, and if that's all you look at, you would miss these significant stories and growth in wind. You would miss some of the nuance in some of the other renewable technologies that are growing, and therefore we just wanted to make sure that there was a caution there on that, especially given volatility and how volatility works, and that any time you look at a one-year snapshot, you want to be very careful to not draw long-term trends. So if you look at solar for the last 2 years, you could say, my goodness, this looks like an industry in decline. It's declined by 3 or 4% per year the last 2 years. Of course, you would then be ignoring almost a decade of double-digit growth. Okay, so it's very important to take a 5 to 10-year look, which is part of the reason why the continuation of this report using a consistent methodology is so important, because it allows us to draw these longer-term conclusions by looking at trends. Here I also just wanted to point out a few important elements dealing with that question of transition. And so when you look at energy storage, this is really exciting. People have been talking about energy storage for a long time. We are actually now really starting to see some significant growth and opportunity, and not only the highest percentage gainer of any technology, but also the highest projected growth over time. Energy efficiency, again, as Dave mentioned, is a big growth opportunity. There's been lots of growth and there's lots of projected growth. And one of the areas that we really do need to focus on is what do these workforce challenges mean for energy efficiency? How do we deal with some of the issues around difficulty hiring and energy efficiency? Because if we don't find better ways of getting people off of the sidelines and into these positions, it will constrain growth. And given what employers would like to do based on their responses and what they're actually able to do, it is very likely that this difficulty hiring is in fact impacting the growth potential. Now here's a slide that I think is is pretty important for us to get some context, and I'm just going to throw this out there because I think from looking at various studies we've done across the country, there are some important takeaways in this discussion about difficulty hiring. And Dave Foster noted how difficult it is for construction employers to find new talent, and also how important the construction sector is to the energy sector. This slide here, which is a little bit hard to see perhaps, but this is from a study that we did, a different study with a survey of 3,000 Generation Z and young millennials, so basically age 16 to 30, with most of the sample being between 16 and 24. And of all the industries that we tested in terms of career interest, we found that construction was the lowest. It was lower than retail, it was lower than hotels and lodging, it was lower than restaurants, it was much lower than healthcare, much lower than technology. And this is not a unique finding. This has been found by many other research organizations that young people have very low interest in entering careers in construction. Part of the challenge I think that we have with construction jobs, and I think that many in the workforce community, education community are contributing to this, is that it is very typical for very well-respected research organizations to publish reports that call construction jobs low or middle skilled because they don't require a 4-year college degree. These jobs are not low skill, and they're not middle skill. And as I was telling the folks on our weekly conference call, I can show you some screwdrivers that are all blackened from me trying to do electrical work without any skills in this space. It is not low skill, right? These are very highly skilled positions, and we have created a narrative that these jobs are lesser because they don't require a college degree, and that they are middle skill jobs and they're not. So I think we need to really stop using that language. And we need to remember that because they are highly skilled positions, and if you look at apprenticeships for most of these skilled trades where there's difficulty hiring, it's a 2 to 5 year window before an individual who starts a training program can work unsupervised. Right? That's pretty significant, and by the way, also about how long it takes to get a college degree in this country. So we shouldn't be thinking of these things as easy on-ramp pathways that are somehow easier than a job that requires a 4-year degree. I want to focus on that apprenticeship model, and I know we're going to talk about that some in the panel, but apprenticeship models, when you talk to any employer, no matter how they feel about unions or apprenticeships or positions, when you ask them to describe the perfect training module that they would like to see implemented to then hire folks from, it's apprenticeship. So I think we do need to double our efforts in apprenticeship, and I know that there's been a lot of efforts over the years, particularly under the Obama administration, to increase those apprenticeship models. But this is a real challenge for us to face, and I think it's going to take a collective effort. The last thing that I want to note, again, on these short-term snapshots, but also on state policies, this is just solar jobs that you see here, and these are 4 essentially adjacent northeastern states. So you have Massachusetts is to the left, then you have New York as the grower there, the big grower, then you have Rhode Island and Vermont. And so all of these states on the right border Massachusetts. And what you see is, first note is that even in a region that's fairly similar, right, with lots of the same types of policies and politics and resources, you see really different numbers over time in terms of the growth and decline of solar industry over a year. So state policies clearly matter. We have the snapshot in the write-up from Alicia Barton in New York. NYSERDA is doing great things in New York and really promoting and moving the solar industry there. But I'll also note that the other 3 states here have seen some declines. Those are some very early adopters and some of the real market leaders per capita in the United States who saw this meteoric explosion of jobs. And then there's been some changing business models in terms of how sales are done or how other things are done, so that A, don't look at a 1-year snapshot and say that you have a trend, and B, don't think that the entire United States is going to be the same, because there are these real differences. So I think with that, it's probably a good time to transition to the panel. So I will ask our panelists to come up, and again, thank David Terry and Secretary Moniz and David Foster for their comments. And then we'll turn it over to our moderator, Pete Baird.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Pete Baer with E&E News. My job is to help this expert panel get through about an hour and a half of discussion and another hour and a half of questions from all of you in about 25 or 30 minutes. But this is what happens with Dr. Moniz's studies. I started covering some of his reports when he was still at MIT, and of course they continued at the Energy Department, and they're still continuing, and they're truly drinking out of a fire hose. So there's an awful lot in this report to chew on and think about, because it reveals kind of a ground level look at these dynamic changes that we're all seeing going on in the energy sector, whether it's the tremendous growth of fossil fuels or the continuing transition to cleaner energy options. So we're going to start and take a look at some different perspectives about the report from the members of our panel. And you've already met Phil. We have Dr. Laura Nelson, who is Governor Herbert's energy advisor in Utah. We have Jason Hartke, who's the president of the Alliance to Save Energy, and Danielle Dean Ryan, who's director of the Inclusive Clean Economy program at the Nathan Cummings Foundation, based in New York. She's based here, but the foundation is in New York. So I'd like to start with Dr. Nelson and pick up on the idea that this report is really revealing the different strategies that states are following. And I'd like to begin by turning to you and asking you, what is Utah doing to develop an energy strategy that is really tuned to its resources, energy resources inside the state? Because is that telling us something about the diversity of responses that we're going to see among all the states to the energy transitions that are ahead?
Good morning. Thank you. I think that's a great question and definitely a great way to kick this off this morning. And before I answer the question, I just want to say thanks again. You've heard it already, to EFI and to NASIO and to the many states and participants that created this report, because we have really relied on this data around jobs to drive state energy policy when we look at our workforce challenges as well as our opportunities. And I think that's one of the themes this morning is it a challenge or is it an opportunity? And in my role as energy advisor to the governor, it's critical that we understand the trends that are occurring nationally and also in our state as we determine best policy approaches moving forward. So thank you to all of you who participated and for the leadership in creating this report, even though DOE is no longer producing it. And I think folks have really stepped up to continue to provide this critical data. And as Dr. Moniz said, it really is about providing information so that we can, in fact, make sound policy, sound judgments about our energy future. Now, one of the things about Utah, and some of you may know this, is that Utah is an all-of-the-above state. We like to say that often when it comes to energy. We have an abundance of fossil resources, from coal to natural gas to even some unconventional resources. We have wind, we have solar, we have geothermal. And in fact, we have recently received a DOE grant, the Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy, which is going to, I think, further propel our work in geothermal energy. And energy efficiency. So we really cover the gamut. And so states are unique in their resource mix. They're unique in their policies. They're unique in their objectives. And so I think in that regard, maybe Utah stands out because we don't have mandates around what our preferences are. We really look to the market to drive those opportunities and create best outcomes. But as we now understand better, as we look at workforce development, there are gaps and there are challenges where maybe the market isn't stepping up to answer some critical questions. So what can we do as a state from a policy perspective, from an innovation perspective? One of the things Dr. Moniz often says is not only do we need innovation in our technologies, we need innovation in our policies. And so what can we do innovatively to deal with some of these challenges that we're seeing in the workforce space? So I want to just highlight a few of the things that Utah is doing presently. We're really focused on the STEM piece. We heard a lot about the challenges in hiring construction workers in the construction space. Those are very technical jobs. So we are advancing in, I think, a very innovative way those technical jobs in the STEM education portfolio. We participate in a career fair every year that features folks from our Utah Mining Association, from our Manufacturing Association, really across the board that highlight those technical skills that are going to be needed. So it's not just about informing on what the energy and mineral space is, it's about informing on the workforce needs going forward and building into that traditional STEM education the need for this technical workforce. The other thing that we've done, which I think is innovative, is build a partnership with our local producers and energy developers. In particular, I'll highlight one. We partnered with Chevron 3 years ago to begin offering a scholarship program. You can participate if you're a student in Utah seeking a degree, an advanced degree in the energy space, but there's also a track for students who are pursuing technical degrees in the energy and mineral space. And I think that that's very innovative, and I'll highlight that partnership aspect between the policy sector, the public sector, and the private sector to cause that to occur. And then the third thing that we're doing is generating a K through 12 education platform. It's available online so that folks, teachers, the public can go online and understand the energy sector, the needs within that sector, and begin to think creatively about workforce development. So the partnership between the public and private sector, being innovative in how we deploy information and make it available, and the coordination with the education front is critical. And I'll just mention one more before I move on, if that's all right. Legislation and policy. Utah is unique, I think, in the respect that, and maybe not, we have a significant amount of growth in about a 100-mile radius. That is really urban Utah. We have 29 counties in Utah. 24 of those counties are considered rural, and most of our energy development actually takes place in our rural communities. And those are the communities that are impacted and struggling today. And so we are currently working on legislation and policy to specifically target how this transformative energy economy can meet the needs of both our urban economy and our rural economy. So partnership, policy, education are all key to this transformation that we're seeing today. And this report, I think, highlights where we need to target and what we need to do. So thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Nelson. I'm going to switch now to Danielle Dean Ryan and ask you to pick up on David Foster's comment about the opportunity to bring people off the sidelines, that the move toward new energy options, new energy strategies, creates opportunities in communities of color to participate in this transition. However, is that really happening? And what could be done to strengthen that response?
Thank you, Peter. Everyone hearing me okay with this mic in the back? Good, thank you. It's a real pleasure to join you this morning from the Nathan Cummings Foundation. And again, sincere congratulations to this team that produced the report. It's an honor to join with the other foundations, NASEO and the Energy Futures Initiative and other state agencies in supporting this report. I want to share that the Nathan Cummings Foundation is a family foundation that's focused, just to add some context, on what we consider two of the greatest challenges of our time, climate change and growing inequality. Many of you would have heard that a year ago, our foundation also decided it would align 100% of its almost $500 million endowment with our mission. So we're going to be complementing our grant making and investment in excellent research like this with our impact investing over time. And we're the largest foundation to commit to 100% of our foundation's endowment being aligned with mission-aligned investing. The Inclusive Economy, Clean Economy program that I run supports organizations and leaders that are working to ensure that as we have this clean energy transition, we embed into the DNA of our efforts equity, diversity, and inclusion. That not being done is part of the reason we're seeing some of these problems today. So crisis versus opportunity is a great frame for this conversation. We have, to get specific on the place we're seeing the most growth, the energy efficiency sector delivering continued high expected growth. And as we heard, hiring difficulty, not just bad, but going from bad to worse. It's so critical to have this data. And this against a backdrop of growing inequality and people looking for jobs that pay good wages. We hear about full employment, but we know that in the African American community, it's above average. The unemployment rate is 6.8%. And we saw, to pull out the information again here, that in the African American community, they're 12% of the population, but between 5 and 9% of folks in this sector. We can make a serious dent in solving this hiring difficulty challenge, and I'll mention 3 key pieces that echo some of what we heard. We can't emphasize enough the cross-sector partnerships that are important, and that means partnering with organizations that have relationships in the communities and in the networks that we want to source folks from. And institutions are key, individuals are key. This is not a matter of companies just doing a better job hanging up help-wanted shingles in different places, and the investment is needed. Also, the executive level diversity in the companies that want to do the hiring is often an overlooked factor. The diversity of the executives on the board bring a range of relationships, so that's an issue that often gets overlooked that needs to be addressed as well. One institution that is a great one to highlight and partner with is the Emerald Cities Collaborative, a partner of ours, and I'll mention another that's in the report as well. It's a national nonprofit working as we have these transitions to create what they call a high road economy, where you're getting sustainable, just, and inclusive jobs. They've got national partners, local partners. They bring the community, labor, business, and government sectors together. One of their efforts is an e-contractor academy, and you can find more information about that on their website. They're in places like Ohio, not just in places like California, but they're there as well. And they provide energy efficiency and renewable energy project training for small and minority contractors and broker relationships with labor and other partners. What they need is scale and greater investment. Its CEO is a former academic that understands what's happening with young people coming out of the pipeline, and she's now putting a lot of this into practice. The other critical thing to bear in mind as we think about hiring difficulty, it's not just the hard hat jobs. We're seeing it as well in the professional services sector, and so the relationships there are important as well. I'm thrilled to see Paula Glover here from the American Association of Blacks in Energy. For folks that are looking to do this, she's also a terrific resource. The conference last week was terrific. The other thing that I'll mention is a trend that we're going to continue to see as we think about policy and state agencies spending our tax dollars, is that local hire agreements and community benefit agreements are growing. And governments are going to need partners to help execute on these. The companies that can figure out how to address this hiring difficulty challenge are going to have a competitive edge. So again, you have to set goals and measure what matters. If you are not looking at these challenges in a rigorous way, then you're not going to get the change that you need. We're seeing this trend where community leaders and elected leaders and many of the advocates that we fund essentially saying, if your business is going to make a promise to come into our community and you want tax breaks and you want tax dollars, we are going to make sure that you keep that promise, and we're going to get more specific about it. And so it's not a feel-good thing to do. It's critical to solving this challenge. One example, for those that might not have heard of it, is the California Air Resources Board last year passed a first-of-its-kind regulation where there's now a statewide goal for public transit agencies to transition 100% of their buses to zero-emission fleets by 2040. Good for the communities that have buses running through them, good for climate. what got slightly less attention was that CARB now is attaching workforce and training provisions to this measure. We are going to be seeing more of this, and it's an important trend. One of the partners that was highlighted in this report, Jobs to Move America, played a key role in partnering with the California Air Resources Board, with LA Metro, and they're also in places like Chicago, like New York, and places that are going to be manufacturing these buses in places like Alabama, because we know companies are looking as well to other places to do the manufacturing. One thing that was really terrific last year and inspiring is I got to go to one of these factories that were making these EV buses. And Jobs to Move America collaborated with this private sector firm to help develop a community benefits agreement in that community, and their specific standards and goals for women, for people of color, for returning veterans. And what I heard from the North American CEO of that private company is that the product quality on the floor went up. And Madeline Janis wrote about this when she said in her Forbes article that fare on the factory floor is bad for business. So they're now getting better products because of these workforce agreements. The last point is someone that's here also representing the philanthropy sector partners that have partnered in this work is the philanthropic sector. We're the risk capital for the social sector space. We support many of the institutions and NGOs that are partnering with governments and private sector leaders. And it's been well documented that in the environmental space, among the foundations and among some of our biggest environmental foundations, the best funded ones, there's a spotty record in executive and board diversity as well. That's contributing to policy proposals that sometimes don't include equity at the scale at which they need to happen. And we're not talking intern programs, and we're not talking young students coming out of college. We need the folks that are at the executive level and designing these programs to be leaders as well. It's short-sighted given the demographics that we're seeing for foundations to think that it's enough to focus on the climate side of the equation and the climate policy side of the equation without routinely asking questions about jobs and about equity concerns. And I think as Ernest Moniz put it this morning, the question is really who are we bringing along, who are we not? And that is not a question just for the people of color in the organization. So again, we're thrilled to be here, thrilled for these findings, looking forward to joining you all in these partnerships to speed learning and lift up good models and partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've heard how addressing the workforce challenges at one level is a state opportunity. And we know that states are handling this in many, many different ways based on what their resource mix, whether they're producers or consuming states. And we've also heard from Danielle Dean Ryan how a lot of the answers are going to have to come at the community level. I wanted to turn to Jason Hartke. Your organization, its mission, based on the name, is economy-wide. And so if the response to these challenges is going to be micro, coming from states to communities, how does a national goal like energy conservation and efficiency get its proper attention and action here?
Right.
If we're working kind of at a micro level, does clean energy lose out to traditional fossil fuels, for example, without some kind of a national focus?
Great question. Where to start? I first want to thank EFI and NASIO for continuing to have this report come out every year. I can't tell you how valuable it is to our organization, and I know it's extremely valuable to so many others. I think I'm here also to in terms of the national picture, to underscore what it means to have energy efficiency jobs continue to grow. You're talking about 275,000 jobs over the last 3 years. See, I used the 3 years, not just the snapshot of 1 year. So we're seeing continued sustained growth, 2.35 million jobs, 2/3 of all clean energy jobs. This is a big deal. And I want to just say, hey, we should have some excitement and some enthusiasm about what these reports are saying, because it really is so important to everything that we're trying to do and everything that we're trying to accomplish. So my one critique of it wasn't 150 slides, but it was a lot of slides. I guess it was slide 36, where finally it said policies matter. All right, so we've heard from Dr. Nelson, we've heard from Danielle. Policies do matter. They make a huge difference. A lot of us come from DOE, including myself, Danielle, Dave, others. And one of the big policies that we work on every year is appropriations. And I just want to give some, shine a light on how valuable it is to have $1 billion plus of research and development that goes into energy efficiency every year. $2.2 billion of research and development that goes into the clean energy economy that we're trying to transition to. Because that's what this is all about. I mean, we're talking about what these jobs numbers show, but from a policy perspective, the backdrop is climate change. And if we don't take action soon and we don't get more jobs in this sector and move faster, that's what this is about, and that's why the policies make a difference. So I would argue that not only do we have this foundational investment in R&D, in amazing programs like weatherization, I think is underinvested. The state energy program, another program that I think is underinvested. FEMP, building technologies, advanced manufacturing, the list goes on, ARPA-E. That's foundational. We have to do that not just for these jobs numbers, but we have to do it to stay competitive and have energy security. We also should be doing more to accelerate energy efficiency, clean energy, solar, investment in wind. And I'm a representative of clean energy and that economy and that transition. What else are we doing? In energy efficiency, we haven't had tax incentives for 14 months now. And I mean, that's in the context of what these jobs are showing, and this study shows, and in the context of the climate imperative, that's criminal. Those have expired 14 months ago and Congress hasn't acted. We also are talking about some big opportunities in infrastructure policy, opportunities to retrofit our schools, which routinely get a D score in terms of their infrastructure level from the American Society of Civil Engineers. I mean, when I got a D in school, I was panic mode. So our schools are aging. How do we invest in schools? How do we invest in residential retrofitting? How do we invest in grid modernization? These would all be huge accelerators, not just to the transition to a low-carbon economy, but to these jobs numbers. These jobs numbers are great, and I'm excited about them, but they could be so much higher. And so that, to me, is the question. How do we accelerate that? How do we get into that conversation? How do we take this report and get it to policymakers so they can make a difference? And I just want to make one note, because this hiring difficulty is a big deal, and it's been noted in this report a couple years. And legislators are listening. So the very first hearing at Energy and Commerce by Chairman Congressman Rush, very first hearing that he had just a week ago was on workforce. And not only did he have a hearing on it, but he introduced a bill to address how do you go from blue-collar to green-collar jobs, and that bill is now out and about. Groups like ours are supporting it and many others. But that's exactly the type of thinking that we need from policymakers. How do you transition the data and the analysis from these reports to sound policy that can get across the finish line and help us accelerate to a clean energy economy?
Phil, I'd like to go
My
down
pitch.
the line to you and say your surveys of employers, you start out with about 30,000 companies, energy companies that you contact, and then you have a smaller number that you talk to in more depth. You're looking backward at what's happened. Would you speculate a little bit and look forward and where you think these trends are going? If the economy eventually slows down, the labor market gets less tight, would these pressures on hiring ease up? Or do you see that this difficulty in getting the right people for the right jobs is going to keep getting more acute?
So you know I'm a lawyer by training, so I'm just going to say yes. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So first off, when we look at difficulty hiring and we think about just sort of the supply and demand metric, clearly if there is an economic recession and lots of people get laid off, then there's a greater supply of people with talent and probably some reduced demand, right? So the simple answer is yes, and we can, it will get easier, and we can look back to 2010 when there were almost 90,000 unemployed or underemployed electricians, licensed electricians in San Diego County, right? So if you're a solar company in San Diego County in 2010, you have a job for $25 an hour, and you get a master electrician to show up and say, I need work, I'll work for $25 an hour. And then you fast forward 6 years later, and that master electrician's making $120,000 a year as an electrician somewhere. Your solar company's sitting around saying, gosh, I can't get these great people for $25 an hour anymore. What happened, right? So that's real, okay, that's real. Now, there's some important lessons we can learn from that. One is a lot of the pathways out of poverty programs in particular were essentially taking people off the street and saying, in a short period of time, we're going to train you how to be a solar installer. And we were doing that in 2009, 2010, 2011. And they were competing with electricians with 25 years experience, and none of them got jobs. I don't want to say none, but almost none. I mean, statistically, probably pretty close to zero. So all these organizations now don't want to do solar training anymore. They're like, whoa, I got burned on that one. I don't want to send 100 people through a training program. Now is exactly the time when we should be doing it, right? Because there's shortages. So the people who are on the sidelines, now is their opportunity to get integrated. And what makes me a little bit nervous is that we're going to wait until there's a downturn and there's another 90,000 unemployed electricians in San Diego County, and we're going to train a bunch of people who have never done any electrical work before to be solar installers. So that's one way that policies matter, because we're going to stick with that theme. The other way that policies matter, though, and the way that you can continue, hopefully to both decrease difficulty but continue to put the foot on the gas of the economy, right, is that if you do the training and get people off the sidelines now and start getting those training pipelines built and invest in things like building retrofits and schools and multifamily residences and office buildings, the runway is so long that I'm not exaggerating by saying you could double the construction sector tomorrow if you just picked one of those segments and said, we're going to do deep energy retrofits and all the multifamily housing across the United States. We're talking many millions of jobs would be required to do that. So there is so much opportunity in the building space for energy efficiency that if we were to say we want to make a serious commitment to train and employ 1 million people, we could do it, right, with the right policies in place to do both, to training the right folks for the right opportunities and investing in those retrofit programs. We could do it. And you could see both a decline in the difficulty hiring and an increase in the job outputs. So they don't have to be so closely linked, right? But it will require significant action and a real focus on who's unemployed, right? Just a statistic that 44% of African American men in Greater New Orleans are unemployed. That's something we could fix.
So we've taken the challenge of job training for a changing economy for granted, would you say? We look at STEM, K through 12. That's important. That's necessary. Not sufficient. Right. Apprenticeship programs are sort of left to fend for themselves. Companies are still kind of hanging up a shingle and saying, if you want to walk up to our door, we'll be happy to talk to you. But what are policies that might make a big difference here, and how do they come about? And really, for anybody on the panel.
So I'll just very quickly say that I do think supporting apprenticeship is key. Supporting apprenticeships for things that we don't always think about as being natural fits for apprenticeships. They work for any type of job, really, and most employment opportunities are some sort of informal apprenticeship process with it. Again, I think that, and this is why Danielle's work is so important and others who are focusing on this equity and access issue, is find the populations of folks who are looking for work and can't get and have barriers or aren't getting in the door. Find out what that population is, work with that population to get to the opportunities, and make sure that you're focusing on jobs. These are good jobs, right? And recognizing that we understand that these are good jobs that pay good wages and good benefits. So I think it's I think it will take some work, because a lot of workforce development boards and community colleges, as I said, got burned during the high unemployment period, where there were more people than jobs, and we have the opposite problem now. So I think it's just being a little bit smarter about linking supply and demand and being more proactive than reactive.
when we look at the report, you see that in aspects of oil and gas production, the difficulty was minor. This was not a big problem for building pipelines and extracting oil and gas. But more problems in some of the cleaner energy technologies. Is it possible that if the job mismatch doesn't get solved, that the clean energy movement is going to really be affected? That the clean energy goals are not going to be achievable or be less realized because of the problems of getting people to work in these jobs?
Yeah, so job quality is one of these challenges, right, where scarcity drives up wages, which is good for workers, bad for business, right? So I think, there's interesting interplays, but certainly greater availability of talent, bringing the cost down of talent, those allow you to do more, to do a lot more deployment. But I'm sure some of the other panelists have thoughts on this.
A couple comments. One, I think that you do need policies, and preferably coordinated policies at the federal, state, and local level. I really like what Dr. Nelson was saying in terms of partnership and policy and those working together and being complementary. And there are some really strong policies that have happened over the years. I'm thinking of the Department of Labor project that they had with SEIU's chapter in New York City to do 100 or 1,000 green supers, and it was training supers in New York City to have the skills to drive energy efficiency and other applications and technologies in their day-to-day work. SEIU was doing a lot of the work. I think unions have been doing a lot of this workforce training. How does that link up with both federal and state policy? And then also you've got groups like the American Association of Community Colleges that have been doing a lot of work in vocational training. There is an underinvestment there, so there needs to be a government intervention, and there's a variety of, I think, opportunities there. I think Phil makes a great point in terms of how do you reframe these jobs? One, I think we all know these are good jobs, but millennials are interested and they're driven by passion and what they want to do, what they see as aligning with their values. And I think there's a way to present these jobs in a way that when you go into one of these construction jobs and you're working 75% of your time on energy efficiency, retrofitting or projects or solar installation, that maps back to your values and your core passion. I mean, when you look at what energy efficiency is doing for the planet, you're talking about $800 billion of collective energy savings every single year. You're talking about a major contribution to greenhouse gas reductions. You're talking about climate resilience. And I think that reframing those jobs in a way that's powerful and meaningful to young people, people of color, people in vulnerable communities will go a long, long way in attracting those folks to these jobs.
I think the other key thing as well is being very careful as you're looking to reframe these jobs or make these policies. Some of these ideas fall down on implementation when the right folks are not around the table. So last week at the hearing that you mentioned, the rush hearing on blue-collar jobs to green-collar jobs, we heard from Gil Campbell, African-American entrepreneur, head of Volt Energy. They're putting solar on at Howard, not too far from here. He's working with the mayor at the DC Infrastructure Academy. He's on the board of an organization in the community, one of the low-income communities as well, where they were able to look at students who had high unemployment and people that had returning citizens, high incarceration rates, and get them eventually into jobs with the training with an average wage of $18 an hour. So you can't just send anyone when you're looking to reframe these jobs, and for the folks that understand what it takes to move folks through these and attract them and implement them effectively, diversity and equity really matters there as well.
Absolutely.
I want to comment on this maybe in just a little bit different way and speak, specifically about Utah, because I really think context does matter. Utah actually has the youngest population in the country, and sometimes people don't know that. We also have an incredibly fast-growing population. Our population is set to double in the next 25 plus years. And, if you compare that maybe to, the size of California, I mean, we've got just over 3 million people today, and we're talking about going to 6 million people. But it's still impactful, especially when much of this is occurring along this urban corridor I mentioned, and our rural communities are struggling, which is where our conventional energy production has taken place. So what we're really concentrated on right now as a state is what I think Jason referred to as having this context of, energy jobs matter. And how we deploy those jobs and how we inform on those jobs is critical. And that has to be organized between workforce, it has to be organized between economic development, and it has to focus on our communities and build on our partnerships. And so that's what we're really doing today, is tying this unprecedented growth for our state, our young population, to create a context around what I think we all now will refer to as smart growth strategies. And it all has to come together in that context. So I just want to highlight the importance of that context.
Thanks, panel. Let's open this up to questions. Please just put a hand up and direct it to anyone on the panel. And here comes the microphone.
Please identify yourself.
Those who spoke about the apprenticeship programs and opportunities, I guess I have 3 questions. One, are they connecting to high schools? 2, are they connecting to elementary schools? I have participated in inner city LA career education programs and forums in inner city LA elementary schools, which was really the time to try and reach these kids. Research shows that you can identify a child and family in need of early intervention by 3rd grade. And we're not necessarily acting on that research. So that's the first question. The second question is, I remember when businesses trained the workers that they were looking for. And I see what I think is a reluctance to do that today. It seems that the businesses are asking for the trained workers without being willing to train the workers. So I would appreciate it if you could comment on that.
I can't comment too much on the first question. Although, we have a couple of education programs in schools to promote energy efficiency, and we have had great success with young people in elementary and middle school being ambassadors of energy efficiency. So not only will they lead on energy efficiency in the school, but then they'll take it home and make sure that those same measures are being done back at their residence. On the second question, I'm not sure I can say definitively. I will say that in architects and engineering communities, there is a very strong commitment to continuing education. And a lot of that continuing education is focused on, I'd say broadly, sustainability and the full spectrum of these solutions. But I'm not sure I can say that across the other industries. Certain companies I know, but without just doing an advertisement, but there are a lot of companies that are members of ours that absolutely take workforce training very, very seriously.
My former colleague at the Washington Post, Stephen Pearlstein, has written a book that talks broadly about challenges of making capitalism work. And he points out that for 20, 25 years now, the whole focus of companies has been on maximizing earnings per share to the neglect of the context in which companies work, their communities, the workforce, and the society. And until that changes, until companies take a broader view of their purpose, it's going to be very hard to get things like job training to really be effective. So that's that's a perspective that he's written about. Any other questions or further comments? Anybody? Yes.
Good morning. I'm Tanuj Jura with Simple Energy and formerly the director of the Colorado State Energy Office. During my tenure with the state of Colorado, we were administering the Recovery Act funds. And a big part of the big tranche of money that was coming in for the Low-Income Weatherization Assistance Program, a big idea around that was how do we make the weatherization program sustainable past the Recovery Act funds themselves. I don't know that we did a great job of that. If we'd done a great job, maybe some of the workforce issues wouldn't be coming up now. I'm curious if you guys have looked at the lessons from the Recovery Act, the big chunk of money that came through in that, and were there things that were done well in trying to develop more sustainable workforce for energy efficiency in particular, or were there things that were done poorly that we now know if we do a program in the future, we'll do a better job of actually creating a sustainable industry?
I don't have the statistics top of mind. There was a great study that looked at weatherization, that huge investment in energy in weatherization. The jobs numbers were, as you can imagine, very, very good. The energy savings also were very, very good. I think it's, when you go from investing billions, going back to, $250 million annually in terms of weatherization, that's a drop off. So what's the part of the question is, what's the federal government continuing investment in weatherization going to be? I think it's interesting. Just so I would recommend referring to that study and digging in. I think there's probably more they could have done in terms of lessons learned on workforce. I think one of the things that's interesting on weatherization is that there are already legislators that are looking at it as in terms of an infrastructure investment, and how do we actually invest quite a bit more consistently in that program. In terms of one proposal, they were talking about $400 billion additional dollars in that program. I'm sorry, $400 million, $500 million additional in that program, and that's what I think it needs. I don't know if government works a bit incrementally, as you know, right? Unless there's a big issue, unless there's something we're going to do something big on infrastructure, if we're going to do something big like with stimulus, and I don't know if we've stood back and said, what should we really be investing in weatherization and getting to those opportunities. The other interesting connection that they're making with weatherization is how do you start to weave in some of these smart building technologies with some of the more traditional energy conservation measures that are being used, and are there some opportunities to push a little further in each weatherized home?
I would just add briefly, one of the challenges that many utilities are facing and states as they look at the programs is that there are some pretty significantly reduced cost implementations that require virtually no labor for a lot of states. So if you look at how many water utilities in the Southwest, right, they just send all their customers a low-flow shower head and say install it for free, or you do it yourself, and you save a lot of water that way. And LEDs and lighting is a huge part of building consumption. It's pretty cheap to just ship out a bunch of LEDs to your customers, and there's no labor. And many utilities and state agencies are looking at costs and their carbon goals, right? Another element that we should probably think about, and I think it's part of many of the Green New Deal conversations, which I think is a good thing, is the additional economic benefit of putting people to work. And so, yes, it is more expensive to have humans involved in a process, but those humans earn money, spend money, and pay taxes, so the benefits are much, much greater. I mean, even if you have the lighting manufacturer in your backyard, having people out doing weatherization work who weren't previously working creates a lot of economic stimulus for your region. So I think there are some lessons that we've learned, but I'm not sure that we've sort of cataloged them sufficiently to be able to have real guidance to say, here are the various metrics that are most helpful for how to make these difficult decisions.
So when we wind up
do you mind if
I'm just going to jump in and ask each of the panelists if they have any final comments to make as we wind the panel up.
Great, thank you. Well, I wanted to comment on that question specifically, and maybe not to the metrics, but to say yes, there are definitely lessons that we've taken away from that. I mean, half of the energy employment in Utah is from energy efficiency. So you're talking, 60,000 plus jobs in the energy sector, and half of them are related to energy efficiency. And I think the RF funding era was certainly a stimulus for creating those jobs. And weatherization has been critical, and I would say from a state perspective, we've somewhat underfunded that historically, and so what we're taking away today is the need to increase funding. And so I think it's important to highlight that states can have a role in what they do, and that's a key lesson that we're taking away from that era, is what we're going to do in weatherization, how we're going to continue to build those jobs, and realize that value proposition for lower income families and households that may not otherwise have access to these energy efficiency improvements. I'm also proud to say that we just passed legislation to adopt the latest building codes for commercial and the residential sector. And our office, the Office of Energy Development in Utah, is charged with training on those standards. And again, it goes back to this public-private partnership. When you have a booming construction industry, you have to engage in that training if you're really truly going to realize the benefits of a cleaner economy. Energy efficiency in buildings is going to be key. Training that workforce is going to be key. And it can't all just occur through policy. Some of it can occur through policy, but much of it has to occur by building on those partnerships. And one final thing I want to highlight is that we do recognize the importance of making those investments in our public buildings and our schools in particular. So we're hoping for additional funding, in fact, this year, which will allow us to pursue more significant retrofits in our schools and public buildings. So the short answer to your question is that those were important lessons, and we took them to heart, and we're continuing to leverage them today. So great question. Thank you for asking that.
There is one question left from the floor here. This gentleman promises it's a good one, so no pressure.
Oh, boy. Thank you, David. John Gaffigan here representing Fend on industrial cybersecurity plus a variety of green tech. I'm an outsourced VP of sales. Somebody has to ask a controversial question here. We can't go without that. I didn't hear anybody talk about the N word today, being nuclear. And when we have an all-the-above approach, this is more just kind of an observation that I'd like everybody to kind of marinate on, is that we're decommissioning nuclear plants. And I would submit to you with unintended consequences about having a gap in trying to get alternate energy sources to be able to backfill that. There's a lot of real estate that's impacted. There's a lot of jobs lost. I have familiarity with some technology that dates back to the 60s with Oak Ridge Lab on molten salt reactors, which will allow you to take thorium, unenriched uranium, or spent nuclear fuels. That's the key one, because we have such a stockade of that. People can comment upon that, but you can burn spent nuclear fuels, which is a toxic liability, now become a productive asset and keep people working jobs and not have these big albatrosses of nuclear plants that are going to collect weeds. So I just, nobody talks about nuclear and they run for the hills, but I wanted to throw that out there.
I'm happy to talk about nuclear because we currently have Utah Association of Municipal Power Suppliers seeking to secure nuclear energy with the development in Idaho of over a 700 megawatt plant that's small modular reactors set to be online in the mid-2020s at a cost right now, anticipated levelized cost of around 5.5 to 6 cents kilowatt hour. And people think, well, that seems really high, but that is including all of those attributes that we associate with conventional energy. So it's not just on an energy basis, it's really including all of those resiliency and reliability attributes and capacity attributes that we associate with those resources. So we think that that's a really positive move in Utah and in the West generally. We also are looking at funding support for testing small molten reactor in Utah for purposes of creating a medical grade isotope. So when I said we're all of the above in Utah, I meant it literally. We are all of the above because we think the clean energy solutions are going to come from across the board. We're very advanced on carbon capture and sequestration. We have, I think, one of the potentially most advantageous and successful carbon capture technologies because it won't just be applicable to coal or natural gas generation. It will also be applicable to industrial applications. So we're committed. Exactly. So if we truly want to move towards that carbon neutral, carbon reduction in the future, we have to look across all of our resources and find those technological innovations that are going to be key. Carbon capture is part of that, and nuclear is part of that for our resource set.
Panelists, any other concluding thoughts?
Just to share that I want to join with everyone here in one thing that I know we all agree on, the need to have at least the doubling in the investment we're making in our energy research. We talk about what the energy mix looks like right now. We couldn't have necessarily imagined that 20 years ago. And so that is a really critical point. And also this theme of underfunding of the partners that exist, that are effective, and that need to be part of developing these solutions. And so if you're working on any of these issues and the folks around the room don't include leaders of color and the community leaders and the business entrepreneurs as well, that can tell you how to engage with their communities and understand the problems, then we need to address that as well. The solutions are there, the partners are there, the issue is scale and investment and the cross-sector partnerships.
You stole the words right out of my mouth. I mean, these are good jobs. These are inclusive jobs. These are diverse jobs. These are jobs that have to be done in place in those communities. So if we want to accelerate to a clean energy economy, we should be investing in these types of jobs, whether that's workforce training, whether that's the innovation engine that is DOE and the investment in EERE, whether that's tax policy, or whether that's everything that we're doing on programs like weatherization and the state energy program. I mean, this is an agenda.
And I'll just make three quick points to remedy the late notice of policies matter. So three quick points on why policies matter. One is just things to remember as we develop these policies. The great thing about doing this report is that unlike sometimes when we talk about energy and climate change and all these things, sort of we think about metric tons of carbon and we try to imagine it. These are human lives, okay? So whatever we do with policies, let's not allow ourselves to think that the 7,000 lives and livelihoods of people in the coal industry who lost their job is less important than the thousands of people who got employment in storage, for example. So remember, these are people's lives and we should have policies in place that help with that transition, and I think we can do a lot better there. Second, look to the sidelines. We've said that a few times here. We have to get past bad proxies that are being used currently in employment and invest in people and recognize that if we want to help people get off the sidelines who are poor, we need to understand that they are suffering from the trauma of poverty, and therefore things like apprenticeship programs are meaningful because they need to work and earn money. They cannot afford. There is a cost to going to training, and if you're poor, you can't afford to not work. So we have to make sure that we do learn and earn for them. And then the last piece, and this is something Danielle talked about quite at length, so I'll just put it succinctly to end things. There is a seat for everyone in the energy sector. We found that very clearly. There are some seats that are better than others. So as we think about it, it's not just a numbers game, right? Representation at the highest level really matters. So let's work not only on the number of seats, but on the quality and importance of those seats as well.
So I think we end where, at least for me, where we began, and that is the question of whether solutions to these kinds of problems are going to really be written at the state and local community level, or whether the realization of the answer to the climate and energy challenges fundamentally require a national policy at the top under which these other actions take place. And I guess we'll just have to look forward to the next study to next year to get more data on that. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.